Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Speaking Sessions podcast. I've got Alundas Havens here. He is a father, husband, CEO, and founder of Alpha Influence Media and a podcaster. And today we're going to speak about how podcasting is an essential part to growing your brand awareness and position you as the expert in your field. Alundas, I'm excited to have you on. I know we've been getting this schedule, and it's funny offline we were talking because we've been working on getting on each other's podcasts, and Alundas was starting to tell me, all right, man, so today we're going to be talking about this. And I'm like, wait, this is my podcast, right? So it's awesome. It's still going to be great. I know Alundas is prepared. He's definitely a professional speaker, so he'll be able to speak, and we're going to be talking about his favorite thing, podcasting. So we're going to have a lot of value here. But Alundas, tell us a little bit more about yourself, man.
I appreciate you, brother, and thank you again, for giving me the honor. I'm one of those, perfectionists per se, so I'm always like thinking about the next thing, got a million things going on, so
Mm-hmm.
I want to be able to show up for you. But thank you again, brother. So a little bit about me. I kind of battled with a little bit of a tough childhood when I was younger. Parents had me when I was young, so they're narcissists, alcoholics, racist stepdad in the mix, so they're always partying. I'm seeing these things, they're treating me like the adult when I was 5 years old, asking me the questions, saying whatever it is, right? So it was one thing for me where I had these internal beliefs, had these struggles growing up. Once I got older, that was where, I had to literally figure out for myself, like, hey, how are we going to fend? How are we going to figure things out? My dad's house was the hustler house. He had the money, but then there was no food in the house versus my mom's, like there was always food in the house, but a little bit extra, there wasn't. So it was one for me where I was always smart, and resourceful when it came to, money and making friends and be like, oh, I'll go to the store for you, buy you some chips, and then I can buy myself a soda or something. So it was where I got smarter on that, got in the Marine Corps. And that's where, I even had another traumatic event for coming back from home that I never processed, as well as, one of my cousins used to be strung out on drugs, and he used to get himself into trouble, send people after me because he couldn't deal with this stuff. So it was me still battling through that, realizing, hey, I need to move on from this. Good thing is all that adversity, the way that my parents raised me, my stepdad wanted me to act professional all the time, thrive in the military. So it was one for me, became my own boss, 1920 in the Marine Corps. And then my introduction to public speaking was a little rough. So I used to have to do operations briefs when I was deployed out in Kuwait, and a little bit frightening. The reason why is it's different when you speak on a subject that you're passionate about or that
Mm-hmm.
you know about. But it's different if I'm like, hey, Philip, you want to know what you're doing today? And you're like, yeah. All right, man, you got 10 minutes. You're going to read this slide. It's going to talk about these task forces and what they're doing when they go into Iraq. Now, you're going to go in this room and you're going to brief it to these high level executives, and we're going to tell you how it goes. And you're like, bro, I don't know anything, So it's like that, and you have to somewhat remember it, but you can't
Mm-hmm.
look directly and read off the screen. So it was one of those
Mm-hmm.
like trial error burn runs. Good thing, greatest lesson I ever learned is there was an '06 colonel in there. Man was probably like 52, 40, 52, because I asked him one day, man was just jacked, like most jacked dude I've ever seen in my life. He used to run marathons all the time, swimming all the time. And I was just like, yo, this dude's a badass. And I'm in there and had a long day because I had a boss that used to just chew me out and grill me all the time. And it wasn't even that I did my job wrong. It's just that's the old style of leadership she had. So
Mm-hmm.
she does that to me. I'm like, man, I've worked this. I hate this job, And I'm like going through it because by then we're already like 5 months in the deployment. So it's kind of one of those where like deployment has phases. And then once you get to the
Mm-hmm.
end, everybody starts hating each other. And then 6 months, we're like, oh, we're going home. We're going to see our families. Everybody's in love again. So it
Yeah.
was one of those things. I get in there. I seen some like guys in suits because I guess they had like some other execs from like another country or something visiting. And I see guys in suits. So I immediately am like, bro, I don't really want to speak like this. Like, this isn't me. I don't have the confidence. And there goes the internal beliefs again.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm ramping that stuff up. And then I'm talking and I'm like, and doing the breathing and the ums. And he looks at me and he's like, hey, man, you're good. And he's like, I've heard you before. And I was just like, really? And then it just stopped. So from there, it allowed me to really grow there. I've had times, where I was briefing and trying to be professional and then had an officer laughing in my face. So I was a little more brash, so I stopped and I was just like, sir, is there something funny? And he just looks at me and he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, is there something funny that I'm saying right now? And I'm like, oh, I thought this was educational and you're laughing straight in my face. It's a sign of disrespect. And everybody looked at me like, you don't tell that to an officer. And I'm like, no, I'm just saying, like, if you're on stage and you're speaking and someone's laughing at you, like, I would like to know what I did for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
if not, well, then I'm the problem. They're like, okay, so it just came out that was the guy. Good thing is like people realized who I was. And then I also got more comfortable because I went through these trials, where got people laughing at me, was afraid of that colonel. And it really broke me out of that. So now it's a little bit up where I can stand up. I got up at Zach Babcock's event, Alpha Underdog in July, went up. Difference is it's a different conversation. So now I'm talking about my story, get a little bit more emotionally charged up. So I'm crying a little bit. And then it was like going back into the, who's stopping yourself? It was me, but it was difficult at that time because all those emotions arise. I got in front of 80 people and spoke. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't want to do it, but it was one of those where I was like, man, I have to do this thing because if I don't get in front of these people, my time is never going to come again.
I love that. And so you said all this stuff to go into my first question. How did you get over the fear of public speaking? Sounds like you had a pretty brutal startup that most people don't see when they get started with public speaking, but how did you get over that fear?
So it really went into just stop believing what other people think. Because I used to always do that. I was worried about everybody. And that's some things that, were passed down from my parents because my mom's like that. She's worried about what everybody's thinking. And it was something for me where it was like I was worried about it, but at the same time, like I didn't want to make a fool of myself because I wanted to paint the picture. So it's different when you paint the picture and then you be the picture. So it was one of those realizing it was like, hey, I'm a great leader, I'm a great individual. And that time I was at E3 running my shop. So it was something where I was like, I know the skills I have. The Marine Corps was also funny as well because I had a couple other different leaders that would just punk me anytime I tried to talk to them or try to breathe things. And it was just that's their style. One of them, I asked him, hey, man, why do you keep doing this to me? And he just looked at me and he was just like, you know what, I see greatness in you. Like I see my younger self in you. That's why I mess with you. So it was something that like I always had. And then I went on a promotion panel and they kind of did the same thing. You have 5 executives in front of you, basically kind of like Shark Tank, I guess, and you're pitching yourself. And it was like, why do you deserve to get promoted? What are you going to do differently? And I looked them straight in the face and said, nothing. And they looked at me and they're like, what? My boss looks at me and she's like, why did you say that? And I'm like, I'm doing everything to the best of my ability. So why am I going to go above and beyond when there is no above and beyond? Because that's what I'm already doing. So I was like, anything on me else to exemplify, you can just look at my track record, my history, you'll be able to see that. So it was something for me where it was like, I realized like the skills and a little bit of confidence I had. And I'd say great thing is it set me up, whether it was sticking in the military, being able to speak, or getting out the military extremely tough as well, because it was one of those where I injured all my right knee, tore all the cartilage, and even getting out the military, it was one where jobs didn't respect that. They're like, oh yeah, I've experience, but 4 years compared to somebody else or somebody who had a degree. So it was still me being able to learn how to speak to people, figuring out in that first 2 minutes, hey, what is their wants? What is their needs? What are they looking for? So I can be able to deliver for them and give them what they wanted.
Man, so much to unpack right there, but I appreciate you sharing that. Made
Appreciate
me
you,
think of
brother.
a story that you were talking about with that one officer that always he would always give you a hard time because he saw that greatness in you. And I didn't realize it till a couple years after this happened, but my sophomore year of high school, we had this one world history teacher, and he always had this like famous project that everybody had to go pick a country and do a presentation on that. And yeah, I was definitely not a good speaker back then and still working to become the best speaker I can be now. But I presented on the Bahamas and he was like, oh, whoever goes first, the first couple will kind of set the bar for where I'm going to grade at. And I was like, well, perfect. I'm going to go first because I hated researching. So to be honest, I didn't do a ton. I mean, I did the assignment and I thought I did a fairly good job. Definitely not like I would have got top grade good, but should have done good enough. Well, I was the very first one. And when if he's like, make sure you have all these different things. I had like music, I had food, I had like money from the country. I had all these different little things, a PowerPoint to go with it, gives me a B. And I'm like, what? And so everybody was freaking out. And then after that, 100, like everybody else, like the next 10 people got like 100. And I'm like, what the crap, dude? Why did I get like, maybe it was a 90, like it was like an 85 or 90, something like that. I'm like, why did I get this when everybody else got 100? And he's like, he kind of was just like, oh, you didn't do this. And I'm like, I did. I don't understand. And it took 2 years later to find out, because I'd also mentioned in his class about like how I was going to break a 5 minute mile and get into the 4 minutes and everything. And so then, like, my very last ever run, timed run. So when I was actually performing for track and field, I got a 4:59 in my mile. And guess who was there? It was this coach. He shows me a stopwatch. It says 4:59, and he gives me this huge hug. And I think about to that time when he gave me like that 85 or 90, whatever that score was, the lower score than a bunch of other people, even though I was the very first person. And it's because he had a higher expectation for me. So if he wouldn't have had that higher expectation, he probably would have given me the 100 like other people, but he expected more out of me. And so it's the same thing with this officer. So it just made me think of that story there, that, when people are giving you that hard time, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's because they're a jerk. Let's face it. But sometimes it's because they do expect more out of you. But I mean, you're also talking about a lot of confidence and going up and share yourself. How did you create that confidence? Because I mean, even though you're talking about getting over that fear of public speaking, you still had a ton of confidence in yourself. So how have you been able to create that confidence within yourself to know that you could speak well?
Yes, sir. So, funny thing is, and it's one of those things now looking back at it, is like I've always said I'm an extroverted introvert. So you put me in front of people, I can thrive, but I'm really
Mm,
introverted at heart. I don't like having conversation because I really don't care about small talk. Why? We don't get anywhere. I'm going to
yeah.
talk about something that we don't care about. We're going to talk about sports, right? We could talk about
Hmm.
sports, but I want to jam with you on that personal level. So that's
Yeah.
what's different about entrepreneurship is like you, for instance, like me and you are cool because we can jam on both levels,
Hmm.
and we can talk about those things. Hey man, how's your family? Oh, the family's good. This is what happened the other day. Like in my case, like I take care of the little one during the day. So
Hmm.
definitely more aligned to purpose helped out. But I was also the class clown when I was younger. So always getting in trouble, always making a fool of myself. I did a um, legalizing cannabis project my junior year of high school on purpose because I knew that the teacher didn't like that. And we like made a great presentation. Like she was forced to give us a 90. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was one of the teachers that like taught me. She's teaching me that you're a leader. And I'd be like, no, I'm not, I'm a
Hmm.
class clown. And
Yeah.
pulled me out the class. And then she's like, say one thing. So I go outside the class. I probably shouldn't have said it, but I'm like, after this class, everybody's like, yeah, I don't want to be here. Go back in the class. I'm like, Miss B, you're the greatest. Everybody's giving this lady a good time, and she was a
Yeah.
stickler, but it was
Yeah.
one where she was just a good-hearted person. She didn't know she was teaching for 30 years. She thought being the
Hmm.
driller was a good way, and it wasn't.
Hmm.
So for me, was able to have that experience and have somebody be like, hey, you have a super, like you can get in front of people and just make a complete ass of yourself and
Hmm.
and just be a complete fool, and you're okay with it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, because everybody knows that's me and I don't care, and it's like
Yeah.
it's not that I didn't care. Like I said, I didn't care, but I just did it and was like, you either like me or you don't. So it was really evolving that. And it was one thing for me where it was like, at least if I'm speaking, like I know I can get somebody to laugh by something. I'm not the funniest dude, but I could crack a couple of jokes. So it's one of those for
Hmm.
me where it's like just having that humility factor, knowing like, hey, I'm not going to be the best at all times, knowing that, hey, there is some times where you may get nervous. You may be like ums might come out. Like there's ways to recover from it. There's ways to be able to draw interest in, start whispering. So it was like learning all these little elements we can add in
Hmm.
to where it's like if you're looking at the room and then you either make a fool out of yourself and you're like, oh, you can start whispering, or you can say something funny and then like make a joke off of you stumbling. And it was something for me where it's like when I made the joke off the stumbling, oh, everybody loved it. And it was like, oh, okay, so they're not really here to grade me as harshly as I think. Um, as I thought, so even in the
Yeah.
military, there was a lot of times where you had to get up in front of people, speak on things that you don't want to, weapon systems. You're like, bro, I don't know anything about this, but it was just the fact of doing it. And I'd say that's what builds it. It's like somewhat repetition for people. Is if you can have, connection to whatever you're talking about, makes it easier.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think as well, like you said, I stumbled, and then you happen to, actually stumble upon, no pun intended there, but stumble upon the fact that people weren't there to judge you for your speaking abilities. They're there to hear your message. And so you actually then going and making a joke out of what you did, you're getting that audience engaged in be there with you, kind of laughing with you instead of judging you because you thought they were, and finding out that and building that confidence through all that. And that's one thing we need to realize, is that an audience is not there to judge you. They're there to hear your message. They want to get something from that. So as long as you're focused on them and giving them that message, that's what really matters. So it's such a great point. Now, you mentioned something at the end of when we were talking about how you got over that fear of public speaking, about how you've been able to figure out the audience very well, very quickly. I think that's actually a great point. I wasn't necessarily expecting us to go down this, but I really want to bring that out because that's an important thing, to be able to understand your audience and what it is that they're looking for. So, can you dive into that and tell us what's going on in your mind as as you see what the audience is there for, how they're interacting with you as you're speaking, and how you kind of pivot through all of that?
Yes, sir. So I'll use an example first, and you can laugh a little bit. But
There we
for
go.
me, it was we have to learn on speakers that have done it. But like, yeah,
Mhm.
you can always look at the great speakers out there. But I didn't. I looked at wrestling promos, and I looked at Hulk Hogan, The Rock, all these old ones. Why are they so great? Why are they so captivating? Well, probably because they have the tonality shift. They can be able to catch in. They say crazy things sometimes at the right times. Like they know it. They look at the audience. They kind of see the way it is. It's really how it is when we're speaking. If we're like, man, I don't really know, they're going to be like leaning in, if you're whispering.
Mhm.
That's one thing like Bruce Willis, I've heard, is he does that like at dinner tables. If somebody's there, he'll start whispering, they lean in. So it's like, all right, well, we can whisper to be able to get them to lean in. Or if you're looking
Mhm.
at it and maybe you're like monotone and you're super slow, and then all of a sudden you see people checking out, nodding off, then you definitely know to amplify it. Me, I come with a little bit more energy, so I'm going to use that. I'm going to get loud. I'm going to bring it back down. But it's one of those where like you're going to be able to see the audience. It is a little bit frightening. Don't get me wrong. I'm one of those still to this day. Like I don't like going eye contact to people. So
Mhm.
I will do it a little bit. I will look to the back of the room. But it's one of those things where it's like good to know, like, man, like we're all human. So you have to be able to know these things. You have to do it. I also challenged myself before, and I was like in drama class because I got in trouble. So they're like, "Oh, you need this elective," when I transferred schools, and
Mhm.
I didn't have enough units. So it was one where it was like I got uncomfortable doing those things, getting up in front of people. I didn't think this was something that was cool with me, but it was awesome, having that experience, being like, all right, I actually do enjoy this, being able to do this skit or whatever, and just
Yeah.
going all in the moment on it. So it was something for me that, hey, when you read that audience, you look at it, you're going to see exactly what you're doing that's right or what you're doing that's wrong. And then you either use your pitch or tonality to be able to adjust from there. You can use props or whatever else, but it's something where it's like, if I can see exactly, what they're looking like, or, if you have another speaker before you and they're really energetic, and then you're like, all right, I need to bring the heat as well, because I can't be out here being a little bit slow, boring, because, definitely they're going to check out.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. You got to keep that energy where it's at, or bring it higher if you can. I mean, it's already super high. At least minimum keep it there, but you definitely don't want the energy to drop there. And then watching out for that audience, how they're interacting. Yeah. If they're leaned in, you make sure that you keep bringing the energy. That means they're there. But if they start like leaning back, or especially if they're like looking at their phone, like, all right, come on. Sometimes people are taking notes on their phone. So you got to that's not always a telltale sign. I mean, I guess if they're leaned forward and on their phone, unless they're using both thumbs, they're probably just texting then, but they're probably taking some notes. But if they're just leaned back, kind of checked out, looking at their phone, they're probably just surfing Facebook or Instagram or something. So yeah, looking at those cues of the people in the audience and then making that eye contact, also a great thing as well. I know it gets tough. I had that same problem at times with people. It's a lot easier for me to just sit here and look like directly into the camera lens to create the eye contact versus in person just staring at somebody in the eyes. But then people also get uncomfortable with it, which is really interesting to see. So we all get uncomfortable with that, which also just goes to the fact that we should still look at everybody in the eyes because everybody's a little uncomfortable with it. So it's not just you.
100% right, brother. And I'd
Yeah.
say, what's funny is I didn't realize that till the other day. I recorded a podcast episode and I looked directly in the camera. And it was funny how many times I caught myself looking away, and
Yeah.
that because I
Oh
was
yeah.
like, man, I need to change up the way I'm looking. I don't want to just be here and just staring straight at the camera and,
Hmm.
and not moving. So it was something funny that, I caught in my own self. So I was like, all right, I can work on this for future references. When I do speak, good things, I acknowledge it now so I can be able to start preparing.
Yeah, yeah, and I've noticed myself as well as I'll look in the camera and then I notice I like look down too. I think sometimes what it
Yeah.
is that I go and mute the mic so I can clear my throat or something. And so I'm like I gotta look down and make sure I mute the mic and don't turn off the camera because then it'd be like, "Whoa, what's going on?" And
I,
totally distracting for the guest. But yeah, trying to make sure that I'm looking at the camera but not looking like way off, like okay, I'm bored and stuff like that. But it's definitely a challenging thing in trying to find where you can put that camera placement. But speaking of that and really going into the podcasting space, tell us, a little bit about your podcasting background, how it's helped you. Let's start there.
Absolutely, brother. So, actually, funny story, real quick there. So, for me, I have a podcast called the Winner's Paradigm Podcast. That's my first one that I had, and it was really about talking about those limiting beliefs, the tough things we went through, recalibrating mindset. So, my goal there was just to jam with entrepreneurs. There, there's tons that have been through tough situations in life, whether whatever backgrounds it was, but really to ask those questions of what made you a millionaire, what made you successful, why are you so good when you speak in a room full of people you don't know? Like, what's the key there that you got going on, Philip? And why do I need to be able to learn that from you? So it was awesome growing that and learning it. I was able to go to my favorite podcast, Underdog Empowerment with Zachary Babock. And then I even partnered with him as business partners. So it was one thing, even when I recorded the episode with him, he had the echo on. So it was different because like I don't have that on. So I was hearing
Mm,
myself speak and it was a little bit uncomfortable, and then I just like noticed I was dozing off. So it'd be like eye contact and working through that at that time, was I don't listen to that echo. So it's definitely funny, listening to yourself and you're like, okay, yeah, I can be better here. So definitely the delivery, the story, I knew exactly what to do in that scenario because of one of those practice type things. So the Winners Paradigm podcast is where I started thriving, started a business, Alpha Influence Media. And then it went into getting to the point where I'm getting all these amazing guests like yourself, and it was, hey, I need to start a second podcast so I can teach people how to build dominant brands. Two, it was because I felt like when I got out the military, I jumped into business. I went to college to get a business management degree, but it really was teaching you how to be an integrator on surface level type things. So it
mhm.
was like operations and what it's defined as, but you don't know what operations is defined as. So
Yeah.
it was one for me where it was like, okay, my job isn't to be an integrator. I want to be a CEO, a visionary of the company, but I got to be able to know these things. So that's where I started a second
Mhm.
podcast for the business. The business already was a booking service slash we do ad campaigns for Spotify, and then we're going to do some short form reels, TikToks pretty here shortly. So we can kind of take our clients' episodes, chop them up, and then give that to them so they can distribute it to their networks.
Nice, nice. So definitely get with Alundas if you've got a podcast and you're trying to get all that stuff together. I'm sure he can work on some a la carte stuff for you where you don't have to do every single piece of it. But I'll let y'all discuss that later on that. But tell us a little bit with the like a visionary spot. I love that strategy is a huge part in what I talk about a lot on social media. One of those pieces of being strategic to get your brand awareness out there is the podcast. So how does the podcast help you be strategic in terms of building up your business, your personal brand, and then getting on stages as well?
That's a good one. I would say it would just give somebody a snapshot of who you are. Yes, yes,
Mm,
you can absolutely write a book. But let's face it, there's a lot of books out there that are 120 pages, 200 pages, which could be 20. I read a guru book, love the man to death. I've listened to every single interview he's had. I listen to his podcast all the time, but it was like a compilation of all of his stuff in a book. So read the book, I'm
mm,
like, bro, I've already went through this, I already know what this is. So it
mm,
was something for me where it was like, hey, if we can give little snapshots, and that's kind of my goal of it is, hey, we have one where we work on mindset, and then I have another one that's building dominant brands. Why? Because I'm a high ticket service. So I'm not going to be the one where I'm like, hey man, this is how much we cost. It's not going to be for everyone. Some people will get offended.
mm,
So I brought out a free service that I'm dropping a little bit of knowledge bombs. I'm getting people like you on, hey man, how do we build a speaking business? How do I be able to go here? How do I be able to, quit my job and go all in on my business? Like, what are the things you're doing that worked for you that didn't? So for me, it's like, yeah, I'm building a brand that's helping people on mindset, But at the same time, I'm building a brand that's helping people on business where I might not even know that particular area, but I'm getting the knowledge, I'm giving it to people, we're showing them that aspect. I'm showing them, hey, this is how I did it. This is how I got up on stage. These are my lessons that I've learned. So people are able to just tune there, and then when they scale up to the position to be able to outsource it, we absolutely can be able to do that. So it's one of those things for me where just dialing in, on the personal brand, my story allowed me to keep doing it, because as I kept going, it was still sticking to that original story. In my case, went on a podcast, realized that my story was 12 minutes. Probably wasn't the best thing, so needed to redial that down shorter.
Yeah, man, and I like that. So definitely a lot of strategy, and basically a podcast helps set you up as being that known person, building up that known personality, and be able to just give back and give value. Because as you give value, eventually it comes back to you in the form of business, typically. And it may not be from that person directly listening, but they may share it with somebody, or as somebody's like, hey, I have this podcast service or this podcast, I need help with that. I can't do it all myself anymore. Like, oh, I listen to this podcast, I know this guy that does that. And just you immediately can come top of mind by doing the podcast, which then creates that brand awareness, which eventually will lead to stage. It may not directly lead to stage from there. But what are some tips for people on podcasting? Because I know it's obviously about speaking and everything. So when it comes to speaking, when it comes to interviewing, let's say, what are some tips there for people to be able to do better with interviews on podcasts?
Ooh, I can't say this enough. Do your research. Please do your research. Like, I go on, okay, so to grow your podcast, and I'm going to give you that tip, is 3 to 5 podcasts a week for a year. That's going to grow your brand the fastest. That's going to allow you to be able to do it without doing ad campaigns or anything like that. So it is troubling because you're going through so much. You're doing a high volume, but you will run into podcasts that don't align with you. So if it does align with you, don't release it. Don't tell them to. Like, that's it. I've been on some where they were pretty great guests, or excuse me, pretty great hosts, but they didn't take the time to research, and they were like, hey man, so I give my story, and kind of that's why I have a long-winded story, because I say so many different things that you can ask questions about. We could talk about mindset, we could talk about speaking. I add in certain things. So like today, definitely went in a little more of my speaking and said that background. So you guys knew. So it's something where you have to know, if you're the host, you have to know who you're speaking to. At least, know the bare minimums. And then 2, just ask open-ended questions. Like, I don't know how many times, people freeze up. Like, you don't need to freeze up. Just make it a conversation. Ask that open question. Hey, brother, how did you get to where you're at today? Or just find one thing that they're talking about and then do it. Yes, there's sometimes, like, I interviewed a CEO of a big company, and man was a robot. We didn't really click because he was just like, spit it out. And then I'm like, all right, leadership. So it went into me just rambling more and more on my military career. Good thing is he's seen that. He was like, all right, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like, I really respect you for that. And that was something we jammed on. But you have to find that one mutual point that's going to allow you to get through that. And I'd say that's just being actively engaged, kind of hearing the cues. Yes, there's going to be some like that guy that you don't resonate with. That's okay. It just means that you guys both don't have that same chemistry. You're not on that same level per se, but it could work out. So it's one of those things where like all these different factors go into it, and you really are focusing on being the best you can be, whether it's a guest, whether it's a host. And I feel like, when you put that time in, you've worked on it, continuously work on your craft and your pitch. Like, as you do more, you're going to get better.
Yeah, man. And I saw you bring this up, and here I am stuttering. But you bring this up, and there's 2 avenues I want to go here real quick. Because I've definitely had those people. I've had the 2 extremes. I had the people where you ask them a question and you try and make it open ended, and somehow they can answer it in a yes or no. You're like, how did you do that? But they do it. But then you have the other people where you ask an open ended question, and you're like, 20 minutes later, and they finally finish the question, answering the question. So let's start with the first one, kind of dive a little bit more into that. This person that you just can't seem to get them to open up. What are a little bit more on the tactics of how you can possibly get them to open up?
Good question. So this goes back into your research. So what did you find out for them that's important to them? And it really goes into that. So everybody's going to tell you, whether it is, if it's a finance guy and they're so happy about saving people money, you know what it is, you know what I mean? Or if it's a pastor, or if it's, you know, a big person of a company. So like the CEO per se, like what I started to do is shift and be like, oh, so you're the CEO of this company during the pandemic. Like, how did that shift company culture? What was it like jumping from a brick and mortar establishment and going into Zoom, for instance? And that's how you communicate. Like, what were some lessons you learned? And it was like, boom, he got happy. Like, actually, that was a
Wow.
really tough thing that I actually went through, or figuring that out. So I
Mhm.
would say that, you know, sometimes we have to lay off of our game plan in that, to be able to crack them per se, and be able to get into there and figure out what it is. Like, if you figure out what their interest is first, then it helps you establish your interest, because you're like, you know what, this is important to them. I wanted to talk about this thing today, but at the same
Mhm.
time, it's not always about me. It's about what my guests can deliver and how they can add value to my audience. One of those ways is by asking, you know, what's important to them, because then you're going to know, hey, what's driving this person? You know, why do they do what they do? Is it family? You know, ask those questions. Or if they say like, oh yeah, I've got to a point in my business where I can take the foot off the gas, you know, and I have everything automated and I do this. Like, how did you get there? You know, what's it look like now? How are
Mhm.
you spending your time? Because then they're going to be more happy about that. And that's what I found. Like, the more and more people I talk to is like, if I figure out just what they want or what they're looking for, then I'm like, oh, okay, I can definitely have a conversation. It's a whole lot easier because I'm already giving them what they want. So anything I want, they're going to be more susceptible, because they're like, oh yeah, this man just asked me about my story. And people love talking about themselves. They love wanting to feel good. So it's one of those, like, if you keep hyping them up, essentially, they're like, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. But at the same time, it can go one or two ways. You know, you can have that great person, and then you can have those bad people where they want to just keep rambling. So then you got to reel them back in and be like, hey, brother, I know we said that, but let me interject real quick. You mentioned this, and it's like, it's one of those, because I'm even the same, where like you start talking, and I'm like, oh, I have another thought. And I'm trying to talk again. And I'm like, all right, slow it down.
Yeah, yeah, no, man, you just get so excited. So I know you kind of start going into the second question there a little bit, but let's dive into that a little bit more. What are some ways that you can interject? Because it is tough. You got to find a spot, and there's times where I do find a spot, but I still struggle with it some myself. But how do you interject in the middle of them talking? Obviously, not in the middle of a sentence, but how do you go about interjecting to kind of steer them back to where you want to go to keep the conversation going?
Yeah, I would say find a natural pause. So that's
Mhm.
something I like to do, is when they are naturally stopping to speak, boom, interject there. Hey
Mm.
man, like, you mentioned this, I would love to say this, or whatever it is. Yeah, there's gonna be some people that are extremely tough. They may not even do it. They may just be like, can I speak, or whatever? You know, they may not be a
Yeah,
fit. And that's something
yeah.
you need to remind yourself on, because emotions could run high. You know, we got a million things going on. Some people get
Mhm.
upset, whatever, you know. So you can interject there. I've been on the ones where they're terribly long-winded, and you're like, okay. And it could be good, you know, they can be energetic and long-winded. So you're like, oh yeah, you're pumped, you know, and you may have forgot what you're gonna ask, but you're pumped up because of what they're saying, and then it could be super slow. So I'd say really knowing where the conversation is going is going to dictate it. So obviously, if it's a
Mm.
hyped up individual and they're going through and they're like, man, and I did this and I'm on this stage, like, you're obviously not going to want to interrupt them as
Mhm.
much or try to do it, versus the person who's slow. You know, they're not really doing their delivery. They don't know what they're doing. So I'd say, again, you know, it goes back to the knowing your audience type deal, figuring out, hey, you know, what's best for me? How are we going to make this thing happen?
Mm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I've definitely had I've had one or two guests that have been it's like, are you gonna breathe? When are you gonna breathe? I want to get in there and talk. So tell me about that for go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say I've done the same thing. I've been on
Yeah.
some podcasts where it was different. I went on this one podcast. She's like, "You're the first military male we've had here." I'm like, "Oh, you know," and it was different because it's a different audience. So
Yeah.
women, they're more emotionally charged, and that was kind of
Yeah.
how the conversation was. Like, it was high emotion and it was going, but she didn't
Mhm.
want it to keep it conversational like we did. She wanted me to do a long story format, and she
Mhm.
wanted to interject and say her thoughts in between.
Mm.
So it was different for me because it gave me a clear, concise picture of, hey, how do I do my storytelling? How do I be able to set up these
Mm.
things at these parts? I rambled for 50 minutes, excuse me. So how do I be able to do that without being boring? Good thing is she interjected at the right times and was like asking the question, like, man, that made you feel like this. Like, how did it make you feel to do that? You know, da 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 da. And I was
Mhm.
just like, that's a really good question, and went back into it. And she's like, I know we talked about this, but back on this. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I've been on both ends of the spectrum where you've either, spoke for that long time that kept you engaged, or you knew yourself you were rambling. So we got to reel ourselves back in. We got to figure out, hey, what is the one thing we're doing, and then just focus back on that. I know the one thing, kind of like in school, when they tell you when you get a question, you put the answer, or you put the answer is the question in the answer. So it's really the same thing when we're speaking. Hey, what could we do to be better speakers? Hey, this is what you can do to be a better speaker. So you're just reframing that. And even if I forget, that's one thing I remind myself, like, oh, the question was this. Yeah, man. So I know we were jamming on this. I went a little long-winded, but this is exactly what it is. I went long-winded to add more context so people can understand the scenario, the example, because that's how I connect. That's how my brain works. Oh, that's how your brain works. Me too. So it's like, again, we're clicking with people on cylinders that they understand, because again, you're human. So it doesn't make any sense to put yourself on a pedestal to do something like that when it's like we've all gone through these things, and that's traditionally what it is.
Yeah, yeah, it makes a ton of sense. But speaking of long-winded, I want to wind down the episode here. That we've been long-winded, it's been awesome. A lot of great content here, but I want to ask, if you had one message you could share for the rest of your life, what would that message be?
Write your core values down, brother, and figure out, hey,
Mm,
what's important to me? Why is it? So for me, I didn't want to stick with the military core values, because
yeah.
again, I need something that's my own. So I made
Mhm.
mine a corrective action plan. I got to do self-reflection. I got to be able to look myself in the mirror. I got to be able to say, hey, am I, living up to my standard? Do I look good? How's my face? Am I going and working out on my healthy, meditating, like what's that looking like, so I can show up for my family? Well, then I got to be able to do that. So then it goes into um, accountability and transparency. Like, I can't be on a podcast talking about all these things I've struggled with when speaking if I'm either still really struggling at it and I'm not admitting it, or maybe I'm not there. So it's being authentic in that moment, and then anything I learn, I'm applying it to my situation, because it makes zero sense, to read that book and then be like, all right, that was a good book, throw it away for later, and then you totally went on. So I would say just take that one thing from this conversation. Hey, what can I apply to my life right now that's going to allow me to be able to get through there? If you get your core values down, what you stand for, what you're aligned with, it's going to help you definitely for your business, but it's also going to help you, with people, because you're going to be like, all right, well, this guy, his thing is being a great dad, being a great entrepreneur. Well, I want to be around him because that's what I am. And that's what I'm working on to be. Okay, cool. If it's not, or maybe somebody's, has different intentions, well, maybe you're not there right now, or maybe, that's not your goal. So exactly what it is for you. You can always go back to that and then be able to branch off. And that's just really your fundamental basics.
Yeah. Love that, man. Core values are so important. And if anybody feels like they're aligned with you, or they want to reach out to you and just get to know you more, where is the best place for them to reach out?
Absolutely, brother. So I'll keep it easy. TheWinnersParadigm.com is for the Winners Paradigm podcast. And then the other podcast is Alpha Influence Media.
Awesome. Well, Lundus, man, appreciate having you on. You shared so much great value.
I appreciate you, brother. Thank you again.